The origins of this film, it's actually a question we get asked a lot because it's such a bizarre kind of premise that people are like, okay, how did this idea actually come up first? And, I don't really remember all the details, but...
just to sort of get us kick-started onto the idea of old men was that drawing that you did of an old man with these happy balloons, just like cranky old guy with the happiest balloons in the world. That got us started talking about it. And just, I think we were both struck by how old people are so cool, and they have so many great stories, and it just seemed ripe to do a story about a senior citizen,
And then also the idea of just getting away from everything.
Right.
There are days when you're just overwhelmed by people and interaction and social awkwardness, and for me, growing up as a geeky kid, I liked the idea of escaping to my room, and so the idea of escaping the world was something that I think the floating house kind of grew out of that.
Mm-hmm. It's hilarious how the score just kind of jumps around too, just like these slam cuts.
Well, we purposely played around with just bad edits because that's the way we recorded it too at Giacchino. Unconnected to picture, heroic adventure, mystery, intrigue, drama,
together.
Put it all together. And then another little bit of trivia, there's the scene where Muntz is saying, I will not come back until I do. That sea of hats is actually nothing but hats. There's no people under them.
He must have thought that looked pretty weird from his angle.
That would be a good extra, is to see what it looks like from his point of view.
Talk about the title, Up.
Oh, yeah. Well, let's see. Up as a title came about because it seemed very enigmatic and interesting and didn't tell you too much, but it was intriguing. It was the direction Carl wanted to go, but what he really needed to do is kind of come down to earth and reconnect with people.
Yeah, and it has a sense of hope to it, too,
Yep.
Look at those teeth. I love those big, giant kid teeth. My kids are like that, where they're just young enough that their big teeth have grown in. And
She's lost her front two teeth. Yep. The adult, one of them has come in. The other one's still missing. And then there's kids' teeth on the side.
Yeah, she's so appealing.
What are you going to say?
I forget, because I'm just really enjoying... Yeah, my kids have that big one giant tooth, like that, But I think she's just really successful as far as being appealing.
This was a very delicate scene to do. We've just come from a very emotional bit of the film where he's lost his wife, the love of his life. And now we get to a place where we want to allow people the permission to laugh, because this is supposed to be ultimately a comedy. So the easing back into that was really tricky. And that scene of him in bed really captured that, where he wakes up. We can see clearly that her side of the bed is empty. And then just based on his gruffness and the appearance out of nowhere of this cane and the cracking of the back and stuff, slowly kind of warms you up to feeling like, okay, I'm allowed to laugh now. That's why we went back and put Bran back in, because we felt like, all right, if people get a little chuckle out of that, then that's not bad.
Yeah, Bran's inherently funny, and I won't go into why.
So here we reveal Carl's neighborhood and the change that's come about since he and Ellie first moved in. That was something we changed a couple times during the development as well. We started with this idea of Carl's house being in the middle of a mall, like you have, Dillard's over to one side and a Pop Hut or, whatever on the other side.
Oh, that's right. He had Disco Bowl, and there was Disco Bowl next door, and there was a big bowling pin with helium in it, and that's what he used to lift his house.
That's right.
It was the Disco Bowl bowling pin. And like at night, he'd go to sleep, and you just hear this thump, 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 and like, from the disco next door, and his bed would like move around the room and stuff like that. That's funny stuff. What are we, crazy?
I know. Two funny Atticas.
And here's old Russell.
Yeah. Russell's first name initially was Lewis.
Right.
When we first wrote it. And then there's one of the films that Disney was doing had a Lewis character. And we thought, well, let's differentiate. So we looked around and came up with the name
So we changed
Russell.
It to Donald Duck.
Yeah. Russell seemed to work out better anyway, because it's sort of descriptive. What is that word? Onomatopoeic? That
I think it was more Sisyphusian than onomatopoeic, but go ahead. Don't get obsequious with me, mister.
I don't even know what you're talking about.
Right. It was great to work with Asner, too, man. Ed Asner just was awesome. He enjoyed being there. He really wanted to work on this piece. He believed in the piece, and just as funny, told great stories in between. And that's one of the gifts of being in this job, is we get to work with these these great actors that we grew up watching on TV. And here, you're from Minnesota, I'm from Ohio, and we're just sitting there like, hi, off the boat here. Hey, Asner. Hello, Mr. Asner.
He would tease us, and you're like, you want what? He'd be very grouchy with us, but then he'd sort of wink, essentially, and
you two got spunk.
Yeah.
I hate spunk.
Yeah. The first sequence that was storyboarded on the film, and it's remarkably, this seems to happen a lot. The first sequence was boarded as almost shot for shot in the film. Pete Sohn, who also did the scratch for Russell, as we mentioned, boarded it and came up with these two characters. They were right there in his boards, and we noticed when we looked closely, George was one of the nurses, and the other guy's name tag said Nancy. We just sort of felt like that defines who that character is. He didn't even bother to look to see if it was his tag. He just grabbed some tag off the thing. And we came up with this whole backstory about how they behave. And the one guy's very fastidious and clean, and that's why he has those nice white sneakers. The other guy's wearing cowboy boots and a mullet. I think that's a Pixar first, by the way.
I think you're right.
And so there's a whole backstory that came by with those two guys.
There's a subtle burp that the cowboy had, or that Nancy does too at one point, right? Like he's been out too late the night before.
Yes.
I think he picked Nancy for the shirt just so that people would say something, and he could get in a fight with them because he.
Well, that's what makes great board artists. Is that, all the guys on the film would do this, just put in these little details that are very specific and unique, and make the world more rich. Officially, we have 10,297 balloons on the house. So as it floats up into the sky, that's what you're seeing there. Although there is tons of cheating going on. So depending on which shot you look at, there are either more or less. Actually, I don't think there's ever more, but there are certainly less. As you look through the film at some of the wide vista shots where the house is floating in the sky, if you saw all those balloons, it just becomes all these dots and visual noise. And so we caricatured them up to triple or quadruple the size of other shots. And you don't notice. It's one of the sort of stylistic cheats of the film. Whenever you see a balloon next to a character, next to something else you recognize, like the window or the chimney, we had to shrink it back down because you realize, geez, that thing is the size of, 2 Carls all of a sudden. But when you see it just disconnected up on top of the house, we scaled it up just so that it would be visually a little bit simpler to look at this big canopy of balloons. One of the technical directors here did a calculation that you would need approximately 26.5 million balloons if you were going to do this for real. And he did say that that does not account for the weight of the balloons themselves or the strings. So it'd probably be even more than that. So if you guys are thinking about trying this at home, buy stock in a balloon company. The rocking of the house felt like, as soon as we came up with this concept of the floating house, we were brought to mind like the Charlie Chaplin and Laurel and Hardy sort of films on ships where they're eating soup and it's sliding back and forth kind of stuff. We thought it'd be great to play with. We had a scene where Carl just instinctively, oh, there's a storm, quick, get in the basement. And they ran to the door and they ran down the stairs and there was no basement. They nearly fell out of the bottom. And quick, back upstairs, which was great.
It was great.
It just overstayed our welcome a little bit, and we had to cut it.
The other thing we were going to do was he woke up. It's like he's in this storm. Da-da-da-da-da-da. He passes out. He wakes up in bed. He looks around, and it was all a dream.
Yeah.
All a dream. And then he goes over to the bathroom. He puts up a toilet, and there's like a seagull in there, and he looks down, and it's 10,000 feet down the pipe. And then the kid shows up. Hi, you fell asleep. And then he comes down and he's. It's so funny the things that have been in and out too, like this little GPS moment where he throws it. We put it in, and we had a huge debate on how competent to make Russell. And this also was hooked into his dad. That his dad gave him this GPS as a hint that Dad was to come. But we must have taken this in and out, 3, 4, 5 times, And
Kevin Nolting, our editor, hated us. Don't tell me, we're putting it back in. Okay.
And then you see it with an audience, and it gets good reaction. So it's like, phew, glad we put that one in.
Yeah. When we came up with the location for this film, we initially played around with some ideas of, let's set it on a tropical island, that the two of them get stuck on this island with no other people and no hope of rescue, and now the two of them have to deal with being stuck there and each other. And then we thought, well, that's been done a lot. We've seen a lot of movies where people are stuck on an island. Where else in the world could we go that they are completely outside of civilization? And Ralph Eggleston, who's an art director, a production designer here, had this video of these real-life places. And I'd never heard of them. Had you?
Nope, never heard of them.
So we looked at this documentary, and we were just amazed that first of all, these fantastic weird shapes actually exist in the real world, and that we'd never heard of them. And this is perfect, not only plot-wise for our characters to get stuck, but also felt it echoed who Carl is as a character. He's removed from the rest of the world, completely isolated for millions and millions of years. These in real life, there's like 120 of these things, and some of them to this day have never been set foot on by people. So we made contact with the guy who made the documentary, and he actually led an expedition down there. And a bunch of us went down.
We actually did do that, didn't we?
It seems like a weird dream. This sequence was added later in the film making process, and it was an attempt to kind of jumpstart things. We've now had a lot of exposition and kind of a slower pace, and we thought, okay, let's throw a fastball here and suddenly introduce something the audience has no idea what. They're like, am I still in the right movie? What's going on? Who are these guys? And hopefully make them sit forward a little bit and go, wow, okay, now there's something new has been added.
Well, you wonder how it's going to connect. How's this all going to connect to the guys we've seen?
I was like the mislead here. For once the bird raises up behind him, you for a minute think, oh no, Russell's going to get eaten or something. And then we have this reverse shot of the bird coming into position. You think he's going to rip Carl's guts out, and then he's friendly.
And we're playing that police squad framing of the tall guy going off the top,
So the dog introduction, here we go with Doug. Doug was basically invented in another film that Bob and I had developed.
Right.
And that sort of didn't go anywhere. But one of the concepts that came out of that was this collar or some sort of mechanism that would interpret the thoughts of a character.
Yeah, and this is back in 2004, and it's like there was really nothing like that around. And I think the exciting thing for us was you get to hear his thoughts, but he acts like a normal dog. You know, he doesn't lip sync to the dialogue. And just the idea of hearing what a dog would be thinking, like, squirrel! My dog does that all the time, where he'll be just sort of, relaxed, and all of a sudden, he'll be panting, and then he'll stop and look, and then relax back into it. The opening line for Doug, I have just met you and I love you. That comes when I was a camp counselor back in Ohio in the late 50s. Now, when was it? It would have been in the 80s. I had a kid come up to me at the beginning of the week and say, "You are my counselor. I love you." And I just never forgot that. Just this little tiny kid, just the pure love of that, and it just felt like, well, that'd be a good line for Doug.
The other line I remember you coming up with, you were writing the sequence, and you came in one morning and said, "I've got a great thing. They're walking through the fog, and they hear off in the distance, 'I can smell you.'" And I was like, that is the weirdest thing. That will never work. That's what? And luckily we went ahead and did it. And Bob was absolutely right. It's one of those weird, quirky things that just, what's funny is it almost gets a bigger laugh from people who have seen it once already.
I think so too. I think people don't quite know what to do with it the first time around. Just they have your reaction, which is, what the boop? The dialogue for these dogs started off as kind of bad Japanese anime English translation that we laid in.
Godzilla or something.
Godzilla, and that's been done a lot, and so we realized that's been done a lot, and so we were gonna
but
cut
it was based
out.
off the idea that they have collars that translate their thoughts. It made sense.
And I love just stilted dialogue that that sort of, "I will now go there. You will see that I will," that sort of stuff. And but then we had the thought to bang one of these collars and put it up high, so that Alpha's voice sounds like he's on helium or something. And that again, we were going. It was in and out, in and out.
Well, yeah, we played it and we were like, "Wow, wow, that's great," but it's way too weird. We got to get rid of that. There's so many weird things in this movie already, and we actually had cut it out. And Corey Ray, who was producing the film at that time, came in and she's like, "What? Where are the talking dogs with the high voices? Where are the high voices? We got to put them back. That's hilarious." And we did. Thankfully.
Yeah, and we just got to trust that that's a weird idea, but we were going with it just as, I don't know, the Munchkins ended up being kind of an interesting idea or sort of an oddball idea in Wizard of Oz. You start in this more normal place and then you go to this fantastical place. And once he lifts his house up with those balloons, we're going with the idea that, there's license to do some fun, weird stuff out in this Tepui.
Both in the sound design and the music, we talked with both those guys, Giacchino and with Tom Myers, about trying to evoke classic films of the 50s and the 40s, not that we wanted it to sound like that, but we wanted it to be sort of inspired by that.
I think it grounds it too,
Yeah.
Since it is, again, a caricatured film, the music really grounds the film in reality.
I love how, Michael Giacchino he didn't ever wink at the audience. You have a scene like the dogs plotting to find where Doug is, and they've got these high squeaky voices, and yet the music is telling you these guys are serious. They're like, cops or detective agents. So, the music is taking it totally seriously, which to me makes it all the more funny.
Yeah, the music is the Margaret Dumont to the Marx Brothers,
Yeah. The first draft of it that we had on boards was in a giant dirigible hangar.
Right, that he had built down there.
Yeah. I don't remember where the idea exactly came from, but we kept referencing Mrs. Havisham, that it's sort of a fading, crumbling tribute to the past, that he was still stuck in the 30s in his head.
Right. And Howard Hughes certainly came into our brain a little bit, just his obsession with flight and the things that he accomplished, he just wouldn't back down. And so there's a little bit of Howard Hughes here too.
There was a great scene where the dogs bring him in, and there's inexplicably this little section of living room set up in this massive hangar. So it's just empty. You hear this echoey music and drips coming from the broken windows on the top, and there's just this weird, surreal, completely bizarre thing. And then Muntz came out, and he was 30 years old.
Yeah, just looked like he'd been playing tennis, right out of the 30s.
His dogs following him and everything.
Mm-hmm. And that version was a Fountain of Youth version, where the bird's egg was, and when you eat it, you essentially stay young forever. And it was great, but it ended up being just too hard to sort of work through the story.
Well, yeah, it was one of those things. I think a lot of the times you approach things based on what's interesting, either visually or just intellectually. And so that was incredibly interesting, and there was a lot of great material there. But then as you thought through it more, we realized this doesn't really play into Carl's thread. His theme is not about growing old or holding on to the past so much as we thought initially.
But that's right. I mean, it's not so much about trying to stay young or recapture his youth. It's more that he's trying to finish something that he started.
Right.
To feel closer to Ellie. And, that goal is, a misguided goal that he goes through this whole film. And that's where he seems to connect with Muntz, who's got this misguided goal to prove himself, after he's had his career taken away from him.
But...
Again, I always crack up that he put 8 tons of bones in a lighter-than aircraft.
Well, you should have seen some of the first designs we had. We had like one of the heads from Easter Island, that massive thing. So it doesn't feel like the blimp would be able to take off with
right.
Hey, I know a joke.
Hey, I know a joke. That joke was actually written for a different sequence, Bob. You wrote it for a different part of the movie.
We find out that the bird has babies over in the Twisty Rocks, and Carl was standing there, and Doug was just bothering him, standing beside him, sort of throwing him off. And, at that point, Doug was a little bit more interested in getting the bird back to his master than we ended up with. But, yeah, it was there. And then we added it to this sequence as sort of the opener, and then it fell out for a while, and then it came back in at the last minute.
Yeah, it wasn't in a version. We had a general audience preview screening, and we showed the whole film. About half of it was animated. The rest was still on storyboards. And there was a lot of rustling at this moment because you just come from this big action, and then you go to this quiet walk. And we put the joke back in as a way of kind of keeping the entertainment value going.
And it also gives Carl the ability to have still a little bit more of a push away against Doug. He rolls his eyes, sort of shows that he hasn't quite tied in yet to the goal of Russell. He hasn't bought into this new family quite yet. That's coming up.
It was interesting. We actually originally animated it just like he was listening already to Russell, like, gee, this boy speaks wisdom, you know.
That's right.
But then there was kind of no contrast, and you didn't really get the moment when he says the boring stuff, which seems to be a key line, you know.
Yeah.
It really resonates.
That then is a vector right out to when he's looking at the Paradise Falls adventure book. That the small things in life are the adventures.
So we actually went back to that earlier scene and had him play opposite that. So Carl is rolling his eyes going, oh, brother, you know. And then when he says the boring stuff, then you get a nice change. And that's, of course, what makes you register that. What I was going to talk about just briefly is the terrain. Of course, real life, if there was a waterfall, it would be all chewed up and rugged and eroded. But we wanted this to feel flat and empty, you know, so that when Carl finally reaches his goal, in fact, we had ideas of from far off, this thing looks like, you know, heaven.
It's lush.
You know, it's like an
jungle.
oasis over there. And then you get there and it's all just dead and flat because it's a false goal.
We went for just as empty as we could be. The sound is really echoey and cavernous in this house, and it's the first time we've been back, and it's the first time we've gotten a look at just how disheveled things have gotten for Carl. And then he just slowly puts it back kind of the way it was, and we think, okay, he's made it, he's done his goal, and he'll be satisfied. But he isn't.
And so, yeah, of course, this is kind of like, if you think of the movie as a joke, as Andrew Stanton often talks about it, this is the punchline. You know, this is where Carl really turns and goes from a guy who's looking backwards and trying to hold on to these memories to now moving forward. And we basically play that through this sequence with no dialogue and using two props to sell that. One is, of course, the adventure book and this revelation that those pages are not blank. They're actually, you know, they're full of the adventure, but it's just a kind of a redefining of what he thought adventure meant. Carl thought that adventure was going to be travel and exotic animals and places, and instead it's everyday things of changing a tire and going on a picnic and
just being in a relationship, you know, it's an adventure.
So we, of course, struggled with the logic of this quite a bit. And this is where it gets interesting, you know, as a storyteller, we had a lot of people saying, well, now, if that book's been around, wouldn't he have seen that already? You know, this is his wife's thing. It's a precious book. Wouldn't he have looked through it? You know, he would have looked through all of her things after she'd been gone. And that's probably true logically. But for the movie, it just works so well as a reveal of Carl's change that... And we tried to make more logic out of that it's been stuffed in a closet and he's forgotten.
Yeah, we were going to put
it.
a big ribbon around it that he's going to cut open, but I think the animation sells it so well. You get it.
Russell goes off with the leaf blower here, and we initially had Russell going off with a bunch of balloons, which seemed much more poetically when he says, I'm going to help Kevin even if you won't, and just you took it more seriously.
You somehow bought that he then hooked up with the dirigible, which was the problem. How could he steer up there? And so,
well, that's what a number of people gave us notes.
Yeah.
Like, how is he going to catch up with that? The blimp goes like 60 miles an hour or more.
Right. It left like the night before, and he's got to catch up with it. The other thing that then we tried was the umbrella that he popped open. You know, he had a Wilderness Explorer umbrella, and every time he did it, it's like, hello, I'm Russell Poppins. You know, I just didn't take it seriously.
Yeah. So, but then when we hit on the leaf blower idea, not only does it kind of get a laugh, which was not initially intended, but, you know, we take it. But then we also had to go back and set up the leaf blower because otherwise it would feel like, well, wait, now where did that leaf blower come from?
Right.
At least that was the worry. So we went back to the beginning, and Carl uses it to clean his mailbox. And
We were going to duct tape it onto the back of the house when he first takes off, remember, as sort of a steering thing out his back door.
Yeah.
And then, you know, so here's this beautiful sequence where Carl's house is taking off, and you hear it, you know, the whole time.
Which is kind of the problem here, too, where he's like, I'm going to help Kevin, even if you won't. at that point, you kind of want a little levity after all of the adventure book stuff. So,
just the idea of the old man fight was just something we wanted to see. You know, the idea of two guys, battling it out with this great big adventure music behind them, but just that, they're not spring chickens anymore, and their back sees up, and that was in early on.
And then it was out, and then it was back in, and there was a real balance that we were trying to find between the comedy of it and the seriousness. That if you go through the whole movie and then you just make this a gag fest and don't take it seriously, that there's a danger of kind of losing people. And so it was a delicate balance, but I think in the end I'm really glad we went and put all these gags in, because it makes it really funny and specific.
Specific to who these guys are.
You couldn't have Superman or Batman or whoever doing these kind of things. It's these guys. And now this fellow's like, why would Muntz install a lever that makes the whole blip tilt sideways? I don't know.
Just don't touch that lever, dogs. Whatever you do. Here comes the big 3D money shot.
Yeah! That was a cool moment. The ending here was another one where we experimented with a lot of different things, and we knew that elements that had to be involved were, of course, Muntz. That house had to be an integral thing, because we had a couple versions where the planes were involved and the house had fallen away already, and we knew the bird had to be in there, and so it was just a juggling act of all these different things, and how do you use them? We knew we wanted Carl to sacrifice that thing that's the most meaningful to him, is that house at the end, in favor of saving Russell and the bird. But how exactly that would happen we experimented with a lot.
And as usual, we found something and we worked backwards to it, the idea of everyone grabbing onto each other. We then installed earlier in the film as a setup for that. Ronnie Del Carmen, I believe, brought that forward.
And then we have Muntz, jumping off after them and missing, and we weren't initially very happy with that, just because it felt like, okay, that's something we've seen elsewhere. So we played with a lot of different things again. One of them being that he got caught on a bunch of balloons and floated up and away, but they all felt very undefinite, that maybe Muntz were saving him for a sequel or something, and so we wanted it to feel definite that Muntz is gone, that he's not going to be a bother to the bird. And also, for me, it was very important to separate Muntz from the house, that as Carl looks down here and sees that house float away, that's his last goodbye. And so if Muntz is in there, you have this too many ideas, and it was emotionally not as clear. And hopefully by having the balloons and the strings there, it makes it somewhat unique.
It also felt like symbolically a little bit that, this sounds strange, but that Ellie was helping Carl a little bit, the balloons and the strings catching Muntz.
That was something that came out of that. As he jumps from the house and gets caught in the strings, it's almost like Ellie, like you say, reaching out and
saying,
and assisting.
Stop giving my man a hard time.
That's right. And that's, I like to think, you look at a lot of Capra films, that's probably where he would have ended the movie. Da-da-da-da, the end, And we wanted to wrap up and see what happens just a little bit to these guys.
In fact, I wanted Carl to say, "Attaboy, Clarence!"
Yeah.
But you wouldn't let me. All right, go ahead.
And I love the way this ending worked out. Is just ordinary, nothing. It's the point of the movie, right? That the things that matter the most are those things that just don't seem like anything at the time. Sitting in the curb counting cars, and then above them is this massive blimp.
Yeah.
And
in the handicap spot.
That's right. Hopefully you get a laugh there. And then the ending here, again, played a lot with different things, but this really felt right, that it's whether it's literal or symbolic, that somehow Carl is able to finally get that house there, that he's finally lived that adventure, and he's done that by connecting with Russell.
You said it perfectly. That's why I like it too. It's the symbol of his new friendship. I don't even read it as literal. I just read it as he completed what he needed to do, that in reaching out to Russell, he did get the house to the falls.
Oh, we had a pretty amazing time making this movie. It was a really fun project, and I mean, starting from the very beginning, I feel so lucky to have had a chance to sit and work with Bob and just develop this together. It was really something I looked forward to every day, coming into work and getting to work with you, Bob.
Me too.
It's a lot of fun.
Pete, you always look for the heart and entertainment and things, and we just had fun.
We did. And
every day was fun.
We balanced each other really well, and Bob's got such funny stuff. I think, the majority of the funny stuff in this movie is you, and the story crew is really great. I mean, I'm sorry, I'm going to go into like every department now and talk about how great they are, but we've had the benefit of being at Pixar for a while now, and this is Pixar's 10th film. People have honed their craft to this point where every film comes out and I go, how are they going to do better than this? The animator's just incredible, the lighting guys, everybody, the design, everything is just so well done. We're such lucky guys to work with amazing, talented people that we have.
Well, I agree. No, and on this one especially, you could tell people liked it, and they liked the characters. They really wanted to put themselves in here and make it work well.
This film was an interesting balance of the comedy and the really some pretty heavy emotional stuff of loss and things like that. And I think it ended up, for me anyway, that both are really important. That you don't get genuine comedy without some pain, and the opposite as well. It's all about the contrast, and it was a trick balancing those, but to me it works really well. So hopefully people like it. Is there anything else you wanted to?
Well, I mean, this is a long journey. It's like we went on that journey to the Tepuis itself, but this whole project has been a journey. And, I've said it before, and I know you feel this way too, Pete, that when you watch these movies again, you see memories of what happened on days, like a memory quilt.
Yeah.
You remember when that idea came up or who made that work or the trouble we had with this. And essentially it's a chronicle for me of just the wonderful journey we went on.
Yeah, a lot of people ask, what's it like for you watching these movies? And it's like you say, I don't really see the movie. I see the making of it,
Yeah.
Which is what we've tried to do in doing this commentary, is give you a little background insight into what went into making this film. And
I think mainly just you just have to stay open as you go. You try something and see if it works. If it doesn't, then you try something new, and you just show it to people and see what they think. And it's just that simple. You just try to be tenacious and make it the best you can.
Yeah, and I think I may have talked about this earlier. When you see really successful films, they sort of propagate this myth of spontaneity, that somehow the movie leapt fully formed out of somebody's head. And the reality is, at least in our case, and I suspect with everybody, that it's a process, it's a discovery process. You start with something that you like, that you have a good feeling about, and you just keep going with that, and you add to it, and then you cut and prune, and you grow more, and then you cut and prune that. And in the end, hopefully, it has that sort of feeling that it was sprang fully formed out of somebody's brain. But the truth is that it was very much a discovery process along the way.
Yeah, and again, I think it helped that we like these characters.
Yeah.
We like Carl, and we like Russell and Doug, and we just liked the story we were telling and wanted it to be told the best way possible. But thanks, man.
Yeah, thank you.
It was fun.
It was
fun. Hate to see it end.